over, Ella.
Thank you so much, Missy. So I started my book about 2 years ago, and it didn't really start out as a book. It was more so like a therapeutic thing for me. A little over a year ago, I was admitted into an eating disorder unit. And it was there that I really dug into my traumas and figured out the root of the problem. Um, and then once I met people in treatment, I decided that those therapeutic notes that I took for myself really could be some sound advice for others who might be going through the same thing. And so those notes sort of evolved into my story. Um, it's meant for many different purposes. So, aside from mental health, you can relate to it in many different ways. I talk about divorce, starting over, parenting, loss, all of those things that, anybody can relate to, regardless of their mental illness, mental health status, brain health, whatever you want to call it. Anyone can relate to it. But more specifically, I wanted to create a safe space for the readers who are struggling. So I wanted them to feel like they were seen and heard, understood, and hopefully they get a little bit of encouragement to use their voice. If they see that I can make it through, then maybe they can do the same. But even more specifically than just that, I wanted to make sure that we were being, what you said, not just proactive, not just reactive, but proactive as well. So it's great that we're doing all of these things, right? It's great that we're setting up avenues of therapy. Post COVID, I've seen so many more avenues set up, even in the school systems for the children. And that's great and all, but that's kind of like giving somebody the life vest as the boat is sinking, right? Mm-hmm. So why not teach them to swim before the boat starts sinking? And I think that's sort of where our ideas align.
Oh, yeah.
And you have done a wonderful job from what I see so far of educating children at a young age on how to express their emotions, and how to not have judgment with those emotions, how to practice self-care, self-appreciation. And in doing so, hopefully we're raising adults that can rein in those emotions. Anger really is grief unresolved, right? So if we can teach our children how to grieve and not tell our kids like, oh, hey, stop crying, like you should be crying, and instead embrace their crying and ask them like, use your words. Why are you crying? This is normal. Like, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. And I think that we'll see a huge difference in the years to come if we start at a younger age, which is exactly what you're doing.
I definitely agree. And I thank you so much for recognizing the work that we're trying to do with Little Seeds of Hope. You obviously have known and saw that we have 8 pillars of skill building, because when it comes back all full circle of why someone has a mental illness, it starts somewhere in the childhood of the trauma like you're talking about. But what happens is if they're not learning the skills that are needed to continue to grow into a teenager, into adult, something's going to happen. And that's where the mental illness arises. A quick story, a 7-year-old who is left by his mother has to go his whole life with this trauma, the rejection, abandonment issues, and then he becomes an adult and gets married, and then he kills himself. That's the story of my first husband. So it started off as a child. What happened in this child's life that led him to become depressed, that led him to do drugs, which led him to kill himself. And so, yes, I definitely love the fact that you understand that we need to start in the beginning, so that way we don't have to keep throwing out the life proofs and the just everything that goes along with it. Why not get to the core and the root of it, so that way we can all live in a healthy community and really everybody gains from a good, healthy community. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and I think that the foundation that's set in childhood really does play a role in who you are as an adult. And, we can't control the foundation that we're given, right? We can't control the circumstance, but we can control how we react to it.
Exactly.
So, for example, my parents divorced. So, in turn, I then got divorced from my first husband. But instead of following that path, what I could have done in the first place was the opposite. I could have tried to avoid certain situations that were in it, not good for me. And I think that that's important. Like for your first husband, the same thing you were saying, those create relationship attachment issues growing up, right? So if he had known a little bit about what he had gone through, he could have communicated with you. He could have, learned, different ways, different perspective to look at his childhood and to see, how it possibly have made him grown into a better person. But unfortunately, he's missing that piece from childhood. He didn't have the
Right.
toolbox, and I think a lot of the kids today still don't have that toolbox. I think we're trying to put a band-aid over the issues,
Mhm.
but nobody's getting to the core of it, which is teaching children healthy emotions.
Exactly. Yeah, our character Ethan, he teaches about emotions and how to develop the ways of communicating to your parent about the emotions you're having and to embrace it. So thank you for mentioning that as well. So in your opinion, when it comes to the resources that we should be giving to the parents, what do you think that we should really focus on? Because so Little Seeds of Hope was created because of Hope Gatekeepers is the mother. And what happened is I was training the parents and they said, well, what about the children? And so I created Little Seeds of Hope, and that's how it came circle. And so Hope Gatekeepers is a mother and Little Seeds of Hope is all the children. So in your opinion, because of the journey you've been on, what resources do you think would be effective for parents to actually really grab on, attach on, and to be able to use and utilize for their own children?
I think education, first of all, is key, right? So when I was going through my eating disorder, everyone would say to me, and again, this is as an adult, not as a child, but who's to say that this doesn't happen to someone who is 10, 11, 12 years old, right? So I would have food in front of me and they would say, well, just eat. Like, I don't understand why you just can't eat the food that's on your plate. I don't understand why you can't see how skinny you are. I don't understand why you don't want to be healthy and live a long life. And they're asking the wrong questions.
Mm.
Those were not my issues.
Mm.
My eating disorder was a symptom of something larger. So the issue that needed to be resolved was way deeper than just eating the food on my plate. So, if you're going to be the support system of somebody, and as a parent, you're obviously the support system of your child in any manner, you need to really educate yourself. And I think another piece of that is being mindful of the words that we use and being mindful of the sayings that we use. Because there are these sayings that are thrown around society that people kind of just use, I think sometimes because they have lack of better words. So they kind of just throw these sayings out there and they don't really know the implications of the words that they're saying. I've said this before in a few other interviews, like big boys don't cry. That's one of the things that really we need to stop saying as parents. And I think it's awareness. So we don't expect people to just know what to do, right? It's being aware, being educated, having that motive to get educated, having that motive to understand is really what's going to drive the parents to make this come full circle. Because if the parents are not giving them the proper support system, then how can they succeed if they have conflicting messages, especially if they're really young children, right? Like they look up to their parents and anything their parents say or do is what they're going to absorb. So it really does boil down to parents just wanting to do the work, wanting to do the research, wanting to educate themselves, listening. Parents are always talking, but they're never listening, right? So I think that, we expect children to behave a certain way when sometimes we can't even behave in the way that we expect. So, um, mindful that children are humans. You know, they may not be adults, but we're all humans that have the same emotions.
Right. Going back to your book, I really want the listeners to know what they would gain from getting your book. So, as a parent of a child, what do you think? Because you had mentioned that this book really is for a lot of different journeys. So, in a parent journey, where do you think maybe kind of take a little bit of the topics out of your book, what they can expect from your book?
So, um, my trauma really started at age 4 when I was in a car accident. It was in the 80s. So, PTSD wasn't even a thing that they were using as a diagnosis in the 80s, unless it was, you know, someone who was in war, and that was very rare. Um, so, growing up, I had, you know, some issues with scarring on my face that didn't mean anything to me because I was 4 when it happened. So I kind of grew up with it, and it was just a part of me. But in middle school, you know, others would then bring it to my attention, and I started becoming bullied, and I didn't tell my parents, and I kept it to myself. And that's sort of when everything started snowballing. So as a parent, you can read it from, I really write the chapter from my child, my inner child. You know, I write the chapter from a child's point of view, and I retell the story in detail. Parents can see, you know, and hear what it is exactly feels like for a child who's going through something like that. And then in the second half of my chapter, I offer the perspective of an adult. So now, as the adult me, going back into that, what can I learn? What can I use to become a better person? And how can I use this to motivate me to help others? And so each of my chapters really is like that. So the kid that's getting bullied will relate to the story. The parent who wants to try to understand maybe why their kid is acting out can relate to the story. It is relatable on so many different levels, especially, you know, when you get to the later chapters on parenting, on divorce. It's my children's perspective when I was getting divorced, as well as my perspective when I was getting divorced. So there's a lot of different there's a lot of different relatable moments for people at any stage of life in the book.
Wow, that's amazing. So, as a mother who has this knowledge about mental health, can you give us a couple of tips on what you're doing in your journey of motherhood?
Yes. So 90% of what we do in life cannot be controlled.